Okay, my name's Evan Scheibel for CG Tuts Plus, and in this tutorial we're going to take kind of an in-depth look at Maxwell Render. Specifically, in this case, we're going to spend most of our time in Maxwell Studio. We'll jump into Maxwell Render for a portion of the tutorial because really the brunt of this tutorial is focusing on how to adjust lighting, and in this case drastically change a lighting setup post-render. Because it's common knowledge that Maxwell does take a little time to render a scene. Sometimes a couple hours to get a good, nice, crisp render. I can vouch for Maxwell too. It has sped things up. Probably, it's probably twice as fast as the previous releases, which is really, really good. But it still takes a little time. So the good thing that Next Limit has done to kind of circumvent having to re-render different lighting setups is they've come up with this awesome tool called Multilight. We're going to look at that kind of to close out this tutorial at the end. And we're also going to look at two other parts of Maxwell Studio, and that's we're going to just take a quick browse of the camera and the lighting. We're going to look a little deeper in the lighting setup. And we're going to look at some kind of confusing terms and clear some things up with the environment settings. So we're just going to kind of take this scene, dissect it, look at it. We're going to pull as much information as we possibly can out of this scene. And I'm not going to cover things that are covered in other things, other tutorials, other places. You can go to think.maxwell.com, I think, or maxwell.think.com, or Google search that if you have to, because that's probably not the right address. And they have a lot of good stuff over there. However, a lot of it has no audio. It's kind of just they're assuming that you're like this great studio employee that knows the program already, and for some reason stumbled on their site and want to kill some time and watch their videos. They're not really focused on people wanting to get to know Maxwell and get up and running with it. So I'm not going to cover things that are covered there. I'm going to kind of cover some things that you need to know. Not that they don't. That probably came out wrong. That's a great site. Go check it out. Anyway, so let's get started here. I'm going to jump over to 3D Studio Max. And this is the scene as it appears in 3D Max. Now, I've focused in on this here. Now, what I've done here is a little trick. Whoops. And this is the head of one of the street lights. Now, I want to say right off the bat, this isn't my scene. I didn't model this or texture it. All I've done is lighting and rendering. But this is good because a lot of you, if you're a lighter or anything like that, or if you're a texture artist, listen as well, because you need to keep in mind that, like this guy, he made these streetlights, and if you look underneath, he didn't mess with the alpha channels. It's just a solid map. You can't really do much by way of lighting in this scene, just because there's no alphas. There's nothing there to allow things to pass through. So I had to kind of hack my way around this scene to get a good lighting setup. So if you're a texture artist, keep the lighters in mind, especially if you're doing something like a street light. You want to have some things set up. If you're a modeler, same thing. So just keep that in mind. But if you're a lighter working with Maxwell Render and you have a scene like this in your possession that you're not sure what to do, this is how to work your way around something like this. What I've done is I've made a little sphere, placed it right beneath the where the lens would be of this street light, and you can see here what the result was. Pretty nice. You can't really tell, and the only way you'd be able to tell is if you zoomed in like I am right now, because I've made the street lights are obviously they're glaringly bright, so you're not going to be able to tell that workaround is there. But just so you know that's a handy little trick if you need to, because Maxwell, a lot of times you're going to find yourself with like V-Ray or Mental Ray. You're going to find yourself trying to get lights in there and trying to work with attenuations and all these different things, which are good and they're great for control and things like that. But to deal with that here, you'd have a lot harder of a time just because you would. It wouldn't be as easy to just stick something underneath there and let it go like you can in Maxwell. So you can't really tell because it kind of, the light just glares out, and it looks as if those are actually the street light lenses and things like that, which is kind of the look I was going for here. So that's a quick little tip there that you can use. Let's jump back into Maxwell Studio. Now here's where we're going to kind of slow down a bit. We don't have to really rush this tutorial because most of my videos were rushing through because there's so much to cover in so short of a time. But we kind of have the luxury to kind of sit back, relax, and just pull what we need to out of this scene. So let's do that. First thing I want to kind of talk about is the atmosphere lighting. This is a lighting tutorial, so just bear with me if you know these things until the end for the multi-light portion of the tutorial. But I want to kind of look at the atmospheric lighting. Now, two things I want to point out. One is this little thing here, which is, it says GPS. I'm not sure why. I guess you could maybe hook it to a GPS. There's probably some setting somewhere, but just the global position. The S means satellite, but I don't know why that's there. But you can see when I move this little globe here, it changes my atmosphere lighting. So right now we're kind of like in northern Africa, somewhere in that area. We can zoom in here and kind of get it back to where it was. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory, but a few things in this little dialogue here that says atmosphere that most people, at least I didn't know for a long time, and it really helps out with designing your lighting to know what these two things are, specifically ozone and the turbidity coefficient, or you just see coef there. Okay, ozone essentially is a pale blue gas that floats in the atmosphere. Now what most people don't know, however, this is kind of a side little bonus fact here, is that ozone is actually, if it makes its way to the lower atmosphere, it's actually a pollutant. The only way ozone is actually good is if it remains in the higher atmosphere, because then it filters out UV light or UV rays. Just kind of a bonus fact there. But so what the effect of the ozone setting on your scene will be is kind of giving it more of a bluish look. So because it's a pale blue gas, the more of it there is, when the sun shines through that gas, it's going to reflect that onto your scene. So the more ozone, the more blue. Kind of a pale light sky blue, and that's where we get that from. That's why this guy's blue. Most people would say it's the reflection from the ocean, or some other things. This isn't a debate, so we'll just move on. Okay, and the other one is the turbidity coefficient. Now, essentially what turbidity is the best way to explain it would be to have a glass of water, and the turbidity of that water is how cloudy or hazy it is. And that cloudiness is caused by suspended particles within the water. And that's essentially what the turbidity of the atmosphere is as well. So the higher the turbidity, the more suspended particles, therefore the cloudier or hazier your atmosphere will be. And if you ever look at 3D renders or even photographs and things like that, or if you go outside, I live in the desert, so I can see the horizon, and if I look, I can see that it gets cloudy and hazy in kind of like a gradient ramp type fashion in the sky. That's the turbidity, because you can see it better as it goes farther away. That's a whole nother thing called Fresnel, I think, based on the angle or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so essentially, if you have a higher turbidity, you're going to have, usually it depends on your location in the earth, right here, but it'll be more red, kind of more an orangish. And if you see in my renders here, this down, you see this here, that's the turbidity, essentially, or at least the turbidity plays a big part in this gradient. You can't really see it in the night shot too much. Okay, so Again, turbidity is the amount of cloudiness or haziness in the atmosphere because of suspended particles, in the fluid, and the ozone is the amount of the pale blue gas, which is it's O3, which is a triatomic molecule with 3 oxygen atoms. So anyway, that's what ozone is. It'll make in layman's terms, it'll make your scene a little more blue. The turbidity will make your scene a little more reddish, kind of color. Just make your atmosphere more hazy. So I hope you learned something there. If you followed me at all, I have a tendency to ramble, I know, but just bear with me here. Okay, so moving on from that, I want to look at kind of the street lights and what I've done there. Now, as I showed you in Max, I had to hack my way around and kind of set up some lights. I guess you could say light bulbs of my own in that with those spheres. What I've done is, now you can see in the render here. You can't tell, obviously, but I wanted to add some variation in the scene. So I have these, street lights are sodium lights or mercury lights. I guess depends on what city you're in and how much money the city has. But here we're in kind of a back alley. I wanted to have some variation in the lighting. I didn't want it to just be a blah, pale, high Kelvin, blue sodium light. I wanted there to be some variation. So I threw this kind of burnt out looking yellow one in there as well, just to kind of splash some color in the scene, just so you could kind of see what's going on, for some variations for your eyes, things like that. So the way to do this is it's based on Kelvin. So if I come here, you can see, come over here. Now this Kelvin scale directly influences the color of the light, and essentially it's like the heat, I guess you could say, the output of the light. So if I change this to say 1000, it's going to be red, and if I double click here, it's going to re-render that, and there's hardly any output at all. You can see it's hardly any output, just a dark kind of red color. The higher it is, the hotter the lamp will be, therefore the bluer the light will be, or the whiter the light will be. So you've heard the term white heat. That's a good way to think about it. So we'll put this back to where it was. We might even try to lower it a bit. That's good. Okay. And the other ones are just the same type of light. You can see there's really not much change except for the Kelvin scale, which changes the color a bit. Now, if you want to have different colors of lights, this isn't the way to go about it. Don't go around, throwing your Kelvin scale all over the place, trying to adjust the color of light to get like blue, or orange, or green or something like that, because you're not going to be able to do that, and this isn't actually the proper way to do that. I want to cover it in another tutorial about making neon lights, like neon signs, with Maxwell's lighting. But we're also going to look at it a bit here in a second. So, and you have a variation of different things. Now, lumens is kind of a standard way of measuring light. You can buy, a friend of mine has a flashlight that's like 2,000 lumens or something like that. It's like a spotlight. So the higher the lumens, the more light output you're going to have. I tend to stick with the power and efficacy, which is wattage and then the lumens per watt. So you're going to get the same output as you would with lumens. It's just you're seeing it differently in regards to settings. So I'm more familiar with the wattages of a light. So in my room, if I'm doing an interior lighting setup and I have a lamp sitting next to a chair for reading, I know that's going to be probably a 60-watt bulb. So I can hit my wattage right to where I need it to be, and if my scene's set up to scale, it's going to behave just like that light would. And then the efficacy is just how many lumens per watt. or how much the light will output for every watt. And you just adjust that until you get it, because all lights are different in that regard. So that's kind of just a brief overview, and you have all sorts of different things here. We can you can go on forever about the lighting in Maxwell. It's pretty vast. Another thing that I want to focus on and really look at before we head over to the renderer and look at Multilight is a couple camera settings, and then a couple things I've done in the rendering tab. Now, again, this is now you got to think of yourself as a photographer when you're working with Maxwell. Like, you're actually standing here in the scene with the camera, because all of the settings that you see here are, for photographers, essentially. It's based on actual cameras. So if I select my camera here, you can see that I'm actually using a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. It's going to behave exactly like that camera. So if I go back to my camera view, that's the camera that Maxwell is simulating. And everything's going to behave exactly like it would. I want to cover two things in the settings here just to clarify what those are. And that's ISO and the f-stop. Now, an f number is like... how can I say it? Here, let me just read it here. In optics, the f number of an optical system expresses the diameter of the entrance pupil in terms of the focal length of the lens. In simpler terms, the f number is the focal length divided by the effective aperture diameter. It is the dimensionless number that is a quantitative measure of lens speed, an important concept in photography. So the f-stop essentially is not how fast the lens is going per se, but it's the entrance of the light based on the diameter of the lens. So, or the focal length of the lens and the diameter of the aperture. So basically, the lower the f-stop, the more light will enter, or vice versa. So it's going to influence kind of the gamma of your scene. Like if you're in Photoshop, if you were to do a gamma correction, that would be essentially what this setting is in photography in Maxwell. That's how it behaves anyway. Now, another thing is the ISO sensitivity, and that's the speed of photographic negative materials. Now, because nobody really uses film anymore, that's kind of an equivalent when it comes to the measurement. It's kind of how sensitive the image sensor is to the amount of light in the scene. So if you have a higher ISO, your image sensor in your camera is going to be more sensitive to the light in the scene. So it'd be kind of like your camera was an owl. So like, let's say for our night scene here, if I didn't have any lights, like if I didn't have any street lights and I still wanted to pick up that scene, I could boost my ISO, which is right here. And that would open up my aperture and therefore allow more light into the image sensor, and it would be kind of like my camera was an owl there. I guess you could say. I mean, that's probably a bad way to say it, but I'm probably going to get slaughtered by the photographers in the comments, but that's the best way I can say it. I'm a 3D artist, not a photographer, so anyway, so that essentially behaves like kind of like turning up every light in the scene without having to mess with the actual light settings themselves. So it's just a way to kind of brighten up the scene or dim the scene out without having to mess with your lights. But remember, when you're dealing with these settings, you're also you have to kind of compensate here and there. If you mess with your ISO, you have to compensate with the f-stop sometimes. And you have to, things like that, and the exposures, and all the different things kind of work together. But that's what ISO and f-stop is, which are very important for scenes like this. And one more thing I want to really quickly look at, it's not really anything technical like that, but it's two things before we move over to the renderer. One is enabling multi-light, the sampling level and time, and another one is where are we at? yeah, down here, the Simulens properties. Now, Simulens is an interesting thing in Maxwell. What it allows you to do is simulate lens properties. So let's say you have you want it to look like you have a dirty lens. Well, you can see in this what I've done is I have an obstacle map that I've applied, and I have some here, and I've used the obstacle dust map. And what that's done is if I rendered for longer in my previews, you could see it a lot better. But it simulates dust on this lens, so it kind of gives it a hazy look. And it also, if depending on how you set this up here, you can have splotches on the lens and stuff like that. Another one is the aperture map, which just allows you to set up what kind of aperture you'd like: 9 blade, 8, 7, 6, and 5 blade, things like that, square and round. And then you can also have devignetting, which will take away the kind of shadow that the square and the round will make, and different things like that. So that's essentially, if you can make them yourself. So if you want like a crack in the lens, let's say, you can make the crack, save it as a PNG with the alpha channel intact, and load it up in here, and you can have that there. Okay. Now, before we get over to Maxwell Render, I want to just show you how to enable Multilight for working with it in the renderer. You have this time and sampling level. Now, sampling level is pretty much how many times Maxwell will sample each pixel. It's set default to 12, which isn't very much. And you'll see that the lower the sampling level, the larger the grain will be in your image. So I usually set it to about 36, and if I'm doing a production render, it'll probably be even higher, like 64. But the sampling level and the time works together. Like I said in, I think, my last tutorial, if you have a 10-minute render time with a 36 sampling level, it's just going to render for 10 minutes and stop. So you want to make sure you give Maxwell enough time to render all the way up to that sampling level. Usually 90 minutes is about good. I never, like for my previews, I didn't let it go the whole 90 minutes, and it was crisp clear. Probably 20 minutes for this, which I got all these different renders out of. So. And then for Multilight, all you have to do is you have to hit this fly up next to the Multilight here, and just enable what you want: intensity or color and intensity. I enabled color and intensity just in case I wanted to tweak some other things. And then all you do is you come up here and hit render. It's going to give me a warning about overwriting a target file, which is fine. Now I want to resize this so you can see it. This is the rendering application that's called up when you hit the render button. It's going to take a second here. And once it comes up, okay, now I'm going to let this render for one more update, and then I want to really, I want to show you kind of the features of this Multilight right here. It's kind of set up, it seems like an audio mixer for some reason, but you have some settings down here that you can work with. You have ISO, shutter, and then you have all the lights in your scene. Now it doesn't work by physical light objects, it works by the lighting material applied to the object. So in this case we have two because we use two separate materials. Then we have the environment. So let me see what we've got. That's fine. I'm going to stop this, let it write the output, and it's done. Alright, and then okay, kind of zoom out here so you can see. Alright, and ISO, you can adjust this all in real time right now. You can see here, it's over here obviously, and if I hit okay, yeah, if I hit refresh, it's going to update it here in our final image. So we have all this amazing control post-render, which is just incredible to me. So you can control everything. So let's say we've got that. We want more light. We want, let's say, a morning scene or something. It's not gonna look too good right now because I didn't let it render very long. You see, it's just amazing control you have post render, which to me is a really incredible thing. You can't get this really with any other renderer. So just play around with these, and if you want to go from night to day in an animation, let's say, let's bring this back down to, let's say, 100, maybe even lower. Let's say 15. So we've got night, okay? We'll refresh this. Now let's say we want to animate this to daytime. So you come down here to this timeline. I'm going to right click and turn on auto key. Make sure there's a key set there, and I'll come to like frame 20, set another key, we'll come to 16, set another key, and then we'll come to like frame 70, let's say, and we'll do, I don't know, right there. Now you can see over here in our preview, it won't update real time here, we have to refresh it every time, but you can see in our preview we've got an animation there from night to day, and you'd never know it wasn't rendered that way. You know, you can even turn the street lights off. Let's say we can, and then, and then come here. Kind of get a little flicker there. If we wanted, we can come to like 950. And then here we can bring the street lights right down to nothing so that they turn off as... Actually, they would turn off a little quicker, so we can bring them up. And then they would turn off. So you can see really incredible things you can do post-render. And it's not just, you know, it's not just turning off the light, and because you can see that it even affects the scene. So it's really incredible. So that's the Multilight. You can also change color, you know, if you want, based on Kelvin and things like that. Now there's some other things that we're going to look at. Hopefully in a next tutorial, I want to look at making, you know, neon light signs. I might even use this same scene and light up the garage sign over here with neons. Okay, so my name's Evan Scheibel. I hope this tutorial was informative. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the comments. I do lurk the comments on the tutorials quite a bit, so you'll see me post here and there. But if you have a question about my tutorials, post in the comments. I'll answer it. So you know, don't feel ashamed. Maxwell is not a very well-known application, so don't feel ashamed to ask a question. Again, my name's Evan Scheibel. Look forward to more. Check out my other tutorials. And also, you know, keep looking at CG Tunes Plus. Got some great things coming in the works. So I will see you next time, and thanks for watching.